Imagine this. You arrive to an extermination camp, and then you are literally in a row. If they say you go right, you're gonna die. If they say you go left, you might stay alive. Welcome everybody, this is my quick Sunday, and in certain times in life, we have to look back into our past in order to see what we could learn from it. And actually, these times might be devastating or happy. I brought you today a devastating one because this week was the International Remembrance Day of the Holocaust on the 27th of January. So in this video, I will try to wrap up what can lead to a devastating event like the Holocaust. I think it is important to raise our voice, to educate people on topics like this in order to prevent the same thing happening again. Before we start the video, I'd like to warn you that this video might disturb you, so keep watching with that in mind. Also, we've got a whole podcast on the happenings of the Holocaust, the historical things and connections of the Holocaust. So if you're interested in the topic, be sure to check it out. Moreover, I gained most of my knowledge at the Anne Frank Youth Network. They are an amazing organization and I can highly recommend checking them out. I will put some links in the description below. However, I'd like to emphasize how I'm not an expert in this topic. I just like to give some thoughts and conclusions about the Holocaust. Stereotypes, generalization, and hatred can lead towards negative discrimination. This can cause problems between people, tension, and division. In certain scenarios, it even can actually destroy somebody's life. And the most extreme case of which can be genocide. Stereotypes are heads existing in our head about people. And when we make a conclusion from this stereotype, that's what we call as generalization. And then we may even act on those biases, which we call discrimination, and specifically negative discrimination. This phenomenon exists in politics as well. Politicians want to make an influence on us throughout our feelings. Hatred is an enormous feeling, and some politicians tend to use this in order to gain power. And they can get a strong group of people thinking and feeling the same. Especially this type of feeling can result in fanatic thinking, which gains the politician more power. And if that group is big enough, then it can be actually an absolute power. Such powers might be misused, creating a totalitarian regime. Stereotypes are grounded in history. They can be traced back into a certain social tension, and so the same way with what Hitler used. And this appeared in his political campaign and propaganda. In case of the Church, this can be traced back into the Middle Ages, because Christian people blamed Jews for killing Christ. And then a certain socio-economic tension appeared as well thanks to concluded laws within religion. This meant Christian people couldn't work on the banking system. And this resulted them having to accept Jewish people were working in banks. So we can say division between groups is a possible starting point. Feelings-based propaganda can actually make us blind, which we are more vulnerable towards when we are less stable. Think about just in a very everyday case. You arrived home, you've got an argument with one of your loved ones over something which is completely worthless to fight about. And why is that? It's because your feelings sort of blinded you. When this appears in politics, then your thinking starts to lead towards a radical thinking and not rational thinking. And when the situation happens to be so devastating, we tend to be more influential by politics. And in politics, there is another situation as well. Because there are certain times when we have no choice. And this is when like an economical crisis going on. Some people do not want to be the weakest. And they try to have somebody that is weaker than them. But even more significantly, they want somebody to blame their mistakes on. They want a scapegoat, a reason for their weakness. And this can be the same with a country or with the people of the country having a scapegoat for the laws that they've got, which of course does not come out of nowhere and does not influence everybody, but it influences people throughout propaganda and politicians putting these thoughts into their heads, which is in fact can be the basis of a dictatorship, or in other words, the first step of a dictatorship and even a genocide. So we can translate these things more into politics. When Hitler and the Nazis tried to get what they wanted, they had to build a dictatorship in order to reach their goal, actually. And for that, they needed a strong group of people supporting them. In the 1920s, they copped the beer hall pouch, but it failed, and after it, Hitler got even imprisoned. This is when they realized they do not have a strong and a big enough group for having a copt. But then, so they had to get their power legally, resulting a huge political campaign and propaganda concerning the situation of Germany in a radical way. After the loss of the First World War, Austria-Hungary and Germany, so the Central Powers, were in devastating position thanks to their territorial loss and the war reparations they had to pay for the Allied powers. On top of that, 10 years later, the Great Depression happened, which resulted a shifting towards the extremes. Hitler and the Nazis used this for gaining power, and they actually blamed the loss of the First World War on the Jewish. Moreover, they blamed the Great Depression on the Jewish, which increased the already existing social tension between Christian people and Jewish people as they were predominant in the financial sector. Hitler wrote a book while he was imprisoned called the Mein Kampf, or in English translation, My Struggle. The book identified the Germans as the Aryan superior-race, and the Slavs, Romas, disabled people, homosexual people as inferior, and the Jews as parasite. Moreover, they included the Lebensraum, meaning that Germans had to gain territory. Later on, it was continued with another book which included the Nazi plan, which originally wasn't killing the Jews, but to make them leave the country. As we can see, Hitler tried to do everything to pull his thoughts into the mind of the common people. On top of all this, a lot of people supported Hitler without actually agreeing with the Nazi role. This was thanks to the rhetoric towards people getting jobs and also the subsequent improvement in living standards. Lots of people had actually no choice but to support Hitler. And now I'd just like you to think about this for a second. When feeding your family is at stake, then you will try to support a politician who promotes such objectives. A thought can be actually more pushed towards people, the radical thought, and only that thought will be pushed for people, which by actually more and more people will believe that certain politician. And another two factors can actually play a huge role. First of all, if a dictator actually leads the country out of the crisis. And second of all, the effective use of propaganda. Because if a lie is not believed for 1,000 times, Chances are it will be believed for the 1001st time. Hitler got to be a chancellor in 1933 and he started building out the Third Reich in 1934. He was gaining support as a result of actually improving the country. He started construction projects towards France and Poland. Moreover, the military was gaining power and people could get jobs. In that meantime, actually, the Nazis and Hitler started establishing laws against the Jewish and also other opponents of the Nazis. These laws actually took away most of the basic living rights of the Jewish people. And some of the examples can be seen now here. Kosher, the ritual slaughter of animals are banned. Jewish students excluded from exams in medicine, dentistry, Jews excluded from military service. Law for the protection of the German blood and German honor forbid mixed Jews no longer allowed to vote and lose German citizenship. Benefit payments to large Jewish families are stopped. Jews banned from parks, restaurants, and swimming pools. Jews forbidden to use the German greeting. Passports for Jews to travel abroad are restricted. Many Jewish students removed from German schools and universities. Jews excluded from the cinema, theater, concerts, exhibitions, beaches, and holiday resorts. Jews forced to add the names Sarah or Israel to their own. Jewish children expelled from German schools. Jews telephone confiscated. Jews no longer receive racial cards. Jews over clothes, forced to wear a yellow star of David with Jew. Jews forbidden to use public telephones. Jews forbidden to keep dogs, cats, and Jews birds. Forbidden to leave the country. Next step is when a group is physically attacked after everything was taken away from them. And they've got false judgments, arrestments, imprisoning them. And in case of Nazi Germany, it started with extermination camps. During those against the Jewish were issued, a lot of them were already arrested, but this took another step into the wrong way with the Kristallnacht in 1938, when thousands of Jewish shops were robbed and thousands of Jewish people were actually arrested. After this, there was a last attempt to emigrate the Jews into Madagascar, but when this failed, in 1942, the Nazi leaders actually gathered together and decided on the final solution, which meant the execution of all 11 million Jewish people in Europe. They started the executions first with the Einsatzgruppen. This was a special group for killing Jews in the war. And then they started using bullets in extermination camps. Then the exhaust gas coming from cars. And then the Cyan gas chambers, which we all know, just like Auschwitz-Birkenau. These were places where people were most likely killed, or they could either stay for terrible labor work. Imagine this. You arrive to an extermination camp, and then you are literally in a row. If they say you go right, you're gonna die. If they say you go left, you might stay alive. All this resulted in millions of Jewish people dying in the Holocaust, and a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses, homosexual people, Slavs, Romas, disabled people dying in the Holocaust. This terrible event was ended with the liberation of these extermination camps and the fact that Nazi Germany was pushed back by the Allied powers. Also, the International Remembrance Day of Holocaust Victims is on the 27th of January, as in 1945 this was the day when the Soviets liberated Auschwitz. And now we can see how the Holocaust is deeply rooted in discrimination and actually a social tension which led to propaganda, and that can lead into dictatorship based on radical ideas. The word Holocaust means burning sacrifice, or in Hebrew they use the word Shoah, meaning catastrophe. I think the biggest wisdom which we could withdraw from the Holocaust is how we could prevent the same thing from happening again. Raising our voice and education, as I just mentioned it in the beginning of the video, is very, very important. And by decreasing discrimination and social tension and not allowing propaganda, negative propaganda, trick us, we could act before a horrible event like this can happen. And yes, we should be alert even in a crisis time, because the Holocaust happened and it can happen again. And I don't think any discrimination is worth risking another Holocaust.